name's Rhiannon Butler, and this is my statistics project. I did this with Bridget Cleary, and for the beginning, I'm going to be talking about kind of the portion that I did, and then we'll switch over, and Bridget will talk about the portion that she did. So the question for investigation: how does the typical percentage of children in charter districts that are considered college and career ready compare to those in the Sandhills district? Here's the data collection. For the charter, the mean was 45.5, the median was 45.2, standard deviation was 19.5. For Sandhills, the mean was 37.7, the median was 35.8, the standard deviation was 14.4. So the mean allows you to look at the average number of students considered college and career ready, and when compared, the charter district is higher. So it kind of helps you see that overall there's an average of more children considered college and career ready for the charter district. The median gives you an idea of where the center of the data lies, and again, the median was higher for charter than Sandhills. So overall, the middle of the data was higher in charter than Sandhills. The standard deviation explains how spread out from the mean the other measurements are. Charter had a higher standard deviation, which means more variability or more spread in the number of children that were considered college and career ready. Here's some graphs that I used to look at the data from CODAP, and this is where I determined the mean, the median, and the standard deviation. On the right over here, the blue kind of shadowed portion shows the standard deviation, and on the bottom you can see just how much bigger the charter standard deviation is, how much more spread out, and since it's so much more spread out, there's a lot more kids in that area considered college and career ready. The blue and red lines on the graphs represent the mean and the median, and as you can see, they're more to the right on the charter side, which means that they are higher overall.
So how does the data that we collected help us to answer the questions of how does the typical percent of children in charter districts that are considered college and career ready compared to those in the Sandhill districts? Okay, so if we look at this graph, we're still comparing the two charter and Sandhill schools. But as you can see, the Sandhill schools data is in more of a cluster. So what that tells us is that this the standard deviation is lower than charter schools, which means Sandhill schools are more consistent. So the educators are more consistent with producing students who, in the end, are college and career ready. But if we look at the charter schools, we can see that the data is more spread out, and this just shows that there is inconsistency. Some charter schools are producing a high percentage of students who are college and career ready, whereas there are some that are producing very little. So if we look at the data, we can see that charter schools, there's a good chunk that of charter schools that produce 5% to about 20%, and then there's a good chunk that produces like 70% to about 90%. Whereas in Sandhills, there's a smaller number of Sandhill schools that produce 5% to about 20%, and then as well as a small number that produces about 70% to like 85%. But there's a big chunk that produce 20 to about 60. So that just shows us that a lot of these schools are producing college and career ready students, and they're all producing about the same amount. Okay. So now this brings up some broader issues. So something that I think is important to note is that charter schools are funded on a per pupil basis, and they also receive government funding, whereas Sandhill schools have a state budget and they are also funded by local taxes. So if you live in a city that has a low average income, And that just means that the taxes that you're going to be, giving to the government, that is going to be lower. Um, and in, that affects, how much money is going to schools. So if not a lot of money is going to schools, um, this not only affects the teachers who are hired, but the resources the school has. Um, and it also affects the type of students that are in your classroom. So if, the income, the average income is lower, then sometimes some parents are working double time, overtime in order to make ends meet, or that's just what their job calls for. And so sometimes students don't have that support at home to help them with their homework. So there's not someone there to help clear any confusion. Um, and so they can go to school either very insecure and, not wanting to get help and still not understanding. Um, Whereas if, we've found that if you live in a city or an area that has a higher um, higher average income for families, they have that support at home. They have um, resources that give them extra help, like tutoring, etc. Um, so I took the means of each of the charter schools and Sandhill schools, and I used them in the report card website to compare the two. So for Brunswick Charter, 45.6% of students are college and career ready, compared to Cumberland Road Elementary, which is a Sandhill school that produced 37.6% of students who were college and career ready. So as you can see, this is a pretty significant percentage difference. Um, in Brunswick, the students that go to that charter school, 16.5% of them are economically disadvantaged, whereas the Sandhill School, we see a huge difference, the 78.7% of students that are economically disadvantaged. So, as I said before, the home life, that also plays a role in it, not having the resources that other people have. And then also the resources in school, which is like the books, you know, um, the technology. So in Brunswick Charter, the wireless access point per classroom is 1.6. And this is actually very high. This is higher than the average of wireless access points in, all of North Carolina. Um, and in the Cumberland Road Elementary, the wireless access point per classroom is 0.74. This is still very significant because technology is something that we use on an everyday basis, and it's also, you know, a way that people are being taught. We're being taught by using, you know, like apps on different, computers and also smart boards and just different things. So this is actually a big disadvantage for students to not have a wireless access point, a lot of them.